Another thing that will help is to try to map the processes to what you do at work, right? So when they say, okay, we're working on this project, we need you to create a scope management plan, we understand that there's a process, and that process includes inputs, that process includes tools and techniques, that process includes outputs. And yesterday, we got to developmental approach, right? And developmental approach is important because this is where we determine whether we are going to go with agile or waterfall. Now, if your project is waterfall, you are going to end up with a work breakdown structure. Now, let me say something. The way I take this course is to divide it. I start with waterfall. Waterfall is very bulky, has a lot of processes, right? Agile is very straightforward. Agile is quick. It has to be quick. So Agile doesn't have as many processes. In fact, doesn't have a tenth of the processes Waterfall has. So what we're doing now is actually focus on the waterfall aspect of scope management. So everything we're going to do now for the next couple of weeks is all based on waterfall. Now, the reason I take it this way is so that you can easily distinguish what is waterfall and what is agile. Now, if you look at the scope processes, right, you'll notice that we're going to end up with a process called Create WBS. That means this is the waterfall approach. That means if you're managing a project using waterfall, these are the processes you carry out for waterfall projects. And of course, we talked yesterday, yes, it was just yesterday, how to know, what approach you should use. So if it's a waterfall approach, the remaining processes address waterfall, not agile. When we get to agile, I'm going to talk about a product backlog, and that's how you manage scope in agile, right? Agile scope management is very straightforward. It's not as technical, but we need to distinguish the two. So yesterday, I talked about the project charter, having a high-level description of the project, the quality management plan, which talks about the quality standards. And of course, quality standards will affect the scope of work. We talked about describing the life cycle of the project life cycle. That's the phases of the project, right? Then we spent a lot of time talking about developmental approach because we really need to know which approach is best suited for the project you're working on. And the reason why this is important is because there's no longer one size fits all project management approach. There's no longer one size fits all project management approach, right? So, so that is why we need to really, we really need to understand the different approaches and where to use what. Okay, so that's what we're saying. Okay. All right, let's continue. So let's look at tools and techniques. Expert judgment. An expert can help us in determining the scope management plan. Expert judgment refers to anybody that has knowledge about the application area of the project or industry that can help us to create the scope management plan. Now, I forgot to say something in the inputs. Organization process assets is very important in a lot of processes. Why? Number one, from organization process assets, we get historical information, right? Historical information. So what does that mean? It means that if you've handled a project that is similar to the project you're handling, if you go to organization process assets, you can bring out historical information. Another thing that you can bring out is lessons learned, right? From lessons learned from, I won't call it register, lessons learned. Um, it's not called a register. It's called a repository, right? So lessons learned from different projects. Yeah. Then we can also get templates. So most times when you have organization process assets, you can actually get templates, like templates I'm going to be sharing with you. So you can get a template. So if your organization does manage project management using, um, you know, scope management plan, one of their projects, they'll just use the information as a template, and then you can take it. So usually, if your organization has a PMO, you can ask them if you need to create a scope management plan. Ask the PMO, look, I want to create a scope management plan. Do you have any templates? That's where it's coming from. So expert judgment, anybody that has knowledge of the application area of industry provides expert judgment. Alternatives analysis. So alternative analysis is looking at alternative ways of developing the scope and managing the scope, right? Now, let me show you what this means, alternative analysis. Now, this document we want to create is going to guide us through all the scope management processes. The question is, which are the scope management processes? You can see them here. These are all the scope management processes. Let me zoom in them. So you can see plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS, validate scope, control scope. Now, when we look at alternative analysis, we're looking at alternative ways of collecting requirements. We look at different ways of collecting requirements. For example, do we use a prototype to gather information, or do we use interviews? So when we look at alternative analysis, we look at alternative ways of carrying out the processes to select the best alternative, because your scope management plan is going to tell us which approach to use. That's what your scope management plan is. It guides you into the other processes. How do I do this? Read the scope management plan. It will tell you. And for the sake of not just preparing for an exam, but for the sake of knowledge, I'm going to share you a template that more or less spells it out. This is what you need. If someone asks you for a scope management plan, you'll see that the scope management plan will describe everything in the scope, uh, under the scope knowledge area, including how you create the WBS, including how you make changes, who has a right to request for scope changes in the project, and how you, the process of controlling changes, everything in the scope management plan. So that's why we start with this process. So we look at alternatives, and then please, I beg you, the fact that you have access to templates, right, does not mean that you are going to start creating the scope management plan on your own. You must have meetings with stakeholders, which means you are expected to develop the scope management plan and requirements management plan with stakeholders, the sponsor and applicable stakeholders, right? So the fact that you can get a template, and I'm going to share a template with you this today, does not mean, right, that you just run off with a template and, you know, you just run off with a template and you get what I'm saying, right? And you, what do you call it? Um, you just create the plan. You have to sit with the sponsor. You have to sit with other stakeholders. You can even run the template through them, develop it first, get their feedback. But don't just create a template, just use a template and say, this is a scope management plan. If you do it that way, nobody will follow your plan. Nobody, because they don't even know what your plan is. So that's why we have meetings with the sponsor and applicable stakeholders, the the users, all the stakeholders impacted that are necessary will be should know should be involved in creating this plan, even though you're using a template. Another document that is important is called the requirements management plan. And these two documents should do different things, right? The scope management plan helps us to develop and manage the scope of the project. The requirements management plan determines how requirements will be captured and managed in the project. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the requirements management plan as we proceed, okay? So what do you want the scope, what should a scope management plan do? When I share the document, just ensure you can tick this off. When you read the scope management plan template, check whether it actually tells you how scope statement will be created, so you can take it off. How the process for creating the work breakdown structure. So your scope management plan must describe how these things will be done. A definition of how deliverables will be verified for accuracy, and this is talking about formal acceptance. What must be in place for you to accept formal acceptance, the deliverable? Then the scope management plan also talks about how changes will be controlled in the project, right? I wish I can go through one, but I'll let you do that because you can pass the exam without seeing a scope management plan. Trust me. So far, you understand the concepts, right? You can pass the exam, but I like going a step further. Okay? So let's talk about the requirements management plan. So the requirements management plan is a subsidiary of the project management plan that governs how requirements should be analyzed, documented, and managed. And it should contain the following. Well, let me slow down a bit. What is the requirements management plan? The requirements management plan is also known as the business analysis plan. Interesting, right? Now, what does this mean? Who do you think creates this requirements management plan? Who do you think creates it? Who do you think can? Let me just put that word. Who do you think can create this plan? Anybody? I've given you a hint with the second name. Who do you think can create the requirements management plan?
Business analyst.
Exactly. So if you have a business analyst on your team, it's actually their job to do it. But if you don't, guess what? You are the one that will create this plan. So this is where you find out that in um, in some industries, business analysts are not usually on projects. Some industries you find them on projects. In the software industry, business analysts are part of the core project team. But in other industries, construction, engineering, oil and gas, you hardly find business analysts. Not that they are not there, but they may not be represented in a project, and it's okay. So that's why if someone is doing a course in business analysis, they normally get jobs in IT more than any other job. But let me run a survey before I conclude. Do we have business analysts in our organizations working as part of the project team or working interfacing with the project team? Yeah, Cynthia, Ita, Rhoda. Let's hear from you guys.
No, we don't have.
Okay. Peter, what about you? Yeah, Peter. Okay. Rhoda, what about you? Rhoda?
Our business analyst works with the strategy team, not the project team.
Okay. Okay. So you can see that we have different, even with your business analysts, they're not working with the core project team. It's fine. That's how some industries are. But in the IT industry, in the software development industry, business analysts are part of the core team. So if you have a business analyst on your team, right, they are the ones that are going to create this plan, right? Now, let me talk about requirements management, or even business analysis is also known as requirements engineering. Is also known as requirements engineering, right? Which means it's actually a full profession on its own. It's about how we develop requirements on a project, right? So now, so the essence of this requirements management plan or business analysis plan is what? Is to and govern how requirements should be analyzed, documented, and managed. Analyzed, documented, and managed, right? Now, requirements management is actually a process, right? So, for example, if someone says he wants a 5-bedroom duplex, we can get more requirements from that single requirement. Okay, you want a 5-bedroom duplex. How many rooms should we have on the top floor? How many rooms should we have? Guess what? I've already started analyzing the requirement. So by the time you analyze requirements, you get more requirements. When you get more requirements and you have more information about requirements, you can document the requirements. Take, for example, a petrol station that needs to be refurbished. Now, of course, if let's say that in that petrol station, they're using analog pumps. I don't know if we still remember what analog pumps look like, but if you've ever been to a petrol station, probably 20, 30 years ago, right? And when they opened it up, you saw gears, right, where the thing counts. That's an analog pump. Now, if you want to create, maybe there's a project where you need to modernize the petrol station, one of your requirements will be modern pumps, right? Now, when it comes to modern pumps, we can ask the question, okay, what type of pumps are they? Should they be diesel pumps, petrol pumps, diesel pumps, petrol pumps, you know, should they be kerosene pumps? How many pumps do we want? What is the flow rate? How fast should they flow? Now, you can see why it's called requirements engineering, because we're going to keep asking questions until we get details. That's why we're saying the requirements management plan governs how requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed, right? Will be analyzed, documented, and managed, right? And it can contain how to track and report requirements. Requirements management also includes configuration management, and that talks about how to track product changes. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. Configuration management is used in conjunction with versioning. Versioning means version numbers. So this is why when softwares are being updated, they actually use version numbers. So 1.0 is different from 1.1. 1.1 may be that they update a new feature there. They've added a new feature. So the way you track changes in software products is through configuration management, which means that we can track how the product is changing using configuration management. We also have requirements prioritization and also traceability structure. So these are the things that make up the requirements management plan, right? These are things that make up the requirements management plan. So I'll talk a little bit more about requirements management, right? So requirements management is a full process on its own. It's the process of, first of all, capturing requirements, which means asking questions. What do you need in this product? Okay, in this project, what are your requirements? And let me say something. When we miss requirements, it costs money, right? When we miss out on requirements, it costs money, right? It costs money because a customer may complain that you didn't meet my requirements, go and do the work again. So it's about ensuring that we get all the requirements correct. Remember Embraer project, they had 18,000 requirements. Someone was capturing those requirements. That's where requirements management, that's the job of a business analyst. So I also got another definition of business analysis, because what we're actually talking about is called business analysis. And it says business analysis is the collection, analyzing is the collection, analysis, documentation, and prioritization of requirements. So you can see that it's not just one thing. There are so many things we're doing. We're capturing, we're collecting requirements, we're asking people what they want, we're analyzing their requirements. Wow. So this thing, what exactly do you need? And if we don't do due diligence in analyzing, we can make a lot of mistakes. Just like someone that says, we want to modernize. Okay, that's Rhoda's industry, right? Construct petrol stations. And just imagine you meet a client who wants to renovate their petrol station, and you just assume that it's petrol pumps. Meanwhile, that client uses diesel pumps, and you've gone to order. So things like that, if we don't analyze, we don't document properly, right? We are not likely going to meet the expectations of the customer. And then when we document, it gives us enough information to prioritize and say, look, this requirement is more important than that one, and we're sticking with this. So it's a whole course on its own. This is, if you've ever heard of the CBAP, Certified Business Analysis Professional Training, one of the courses we offer, right? This is one of the things that they talk about, right? So that's it. So it's the collection, analysis, documentation, prioritization of requirements in order to meet business needs, right? So that's one definition that I really loved, and that's what we're seeing here. So you can see requirements prioritization. Traceability means we can track the requirements. We can know where the requirements are coming from. Now, let's look at, there's something called requirements, and the reason why I know this is because I also take the CBAP course. There's something called the requirements classification schema. And this is how, if you ever work with a business analyst that probably has done a professional training, this is how they think. Where do we start from? We start with the business need. So that's where it starts from. And what is a business need? A business need is a problem or opportunity that the organization needs to solve. Then we create the business requirement. Now, the business requirement is where we set the business objectives based on the current state of the organization, which means when we look at the current state of the organization, we can now set the objectives, right? Then business requirements are created, and stakeholder requirements, right? Stakeholder requirements could now be contribution from people who are in the business, right? Then we now have solution requirements. Solution requirements talks about the solutions we're going to create, which are now broken down into functional and non-functional requirements. So under solution requirements, there are functional and non-functional requirements. Then lastly, we have what do we call transition requirements. Transition requirements. Okay. So let's use a little example to explain this. So a petrol station has been losing sales. Sales has been declining steadily for the past 5 years, to the point where they are thinking of shutting down the petrol station, which means that imagine get to the point where the cost of running it is even bringing losses, right? They can't keep up with the salaries. So what is that? That's a business need. That's a problem, right? It's not an opportunity, but that's a problem. But let me chip in an opportunity. Now, there's going to be a major expressway built in front of the petrol station. Major, there's this new project, Coastal Line. And that Coastal Line project will make the distance between Lagos to Warri about 2 hours. If you've ever gone via that route, it's not 2 hours. In fact, it's probably a whole day's journey, right? So an opportunity is coming up. That's also business need. So the business requirement is, okay, based on our current state and the opportunity, we have decided to modernize the petrol station. Since a major express is going to go in front of the petrol station, that means that there's going to be a lot of traffic. A lot of traffic means increase in sales. So that's the business requirement, is to modernize the petrol station, and there'll be some high-level requirements here. Stakeholder requirements: the petrol station manager, the attendants, the pump attendants, the few customers that are left, we can now gather information from them. Okay, if we're going to modernize the petrol station, right? If we're going to modernize the petrol station, right? What we need to get input from the station manager. We need to get the input from other stakeholders, right? We even need to get input from the customers that exist, right? And that is the solution. So that's where we get stakeholder requirements. Now, between stakeholder requirements and solution requirements, so stakeholders lead us to the solution, right? So the station manager may say that these are the specification of pumps that are invoked. So we get the solution from the stakeholders, right? And then, and then we get the solution from the stakeholders, and we can get the functional requirements, which means how the solution will work, how the pump should work. Do we have ATMs in the pumps, right? Or, all the functions of the new pumps and everything, that's functional. Non-functional requirements are the quality of service. So for example, non-functional requirements could be are we running a 24-hour 24-hour service, right? Are we open in 24? I mean, are we open 24/7, right? Oh, are we open 24/7, right? So that's the what do you call it? The function. How does the petrol station? I mean, sorry, I'm mixing up. Non-functional requirements are the quality of service, operating hours, things like capacity. How many cars can be in the petrol station at once? So, transition requirements talks about what we need to get ready for the change. So, transition requirements is where we talk about change management, right? That's where we talk about change management, right? Now, what's change management? You are modernizing a petrol station. That's a change. What do you need to get ready for the change? Now, imagine your staff who know how to use the analog pumps, don't know how to use the modern pumps. So, of course, if the change meets them, they're in trouble because they can mess up the work, right? So transition requirements include things like training, getting people ready for the new solution. It could be another one could be getting them new uniforms. Let everybody look. So the requirements to get them ready for the change is what we call transition requirement. Okay. All right. That's it. Do we have any questions at this point in time based on the requirements? How it works. Do we have any questions? Do we have a good idea about this? Right? Any questions, please? Are we good? Can I get one feedback? One feedback. Okay, half a feedback. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because of traceability. Traceability. Now, what's traceability? Now, do you know that the business need generates business requirements? Business requirements generate stakeholder requirements. Stakeholder requirements generate solution requirements. Solution requirements generate both functional and non-functional, and eventually transition requirements. So when we want to track a requirement, we can track it back to, okay, the reason why our petrol pumps have ATMs is really because we are modernizing. Well, we can trace it back to the business need. It's because we are modernizing, and that's what's currently in vogue. That's currently what modern. So, for every functional requirement, right, we can trace it back to the business need. Now, when we cannot trace back to the business need, that usually shows us things that are out of scope. When we cannot trace a requirement back to the business need, then that requirement was probably added by someone that, right, is not following the business need. So those are kind of requirements let me give you an example. So when we were collecting requirements from the sales attendant in the petrol station, one of them said that they want you to add telephone to the pumping machine so that they can call their boss. How does that solve the problem? It doesn't solve the problem anyway. It's just an added functionality that is not necessary. So traceability, when you say traceability, is just like, where is this requirement coming from? If I can't trace it, then let's drop it because it's not going to add any solution. It's not adding to the business need. Okay, I hope we got that. Please ask questions now. This is the moment you need to ask questions if you're going to ask questions, right? Because I'm about to zoom off. Okay. Are we good? Are we good? Okay, I take it that we are good. Okay. All right. So the requirements management plan is created and it governs how we capture requirements, analyze those requirements, prioritize, document and prioritize requirements. So what are requirements? In simple terms, requirements represent the need. Requirements represent your needs. For example, if, well, some of us don't have this need. Some of us do have this need. You want to buy a generator, right? Now, before you buy the generator, we may ask you what your power requirements are. So if I say, when someone asks you that kind of question, when they say, what are your power requirements? They're just asking you, what do you need power for? And you go back to your house and you look at the number of ACs you have, the number of freezers you have, the number of light bulbs, the number of fans, and then you calculate the load and say, I need a 5 kVA, 20 kVA, 30 kVA. What's that? That's your requirement. Now, why are requirements important? If you give me a solution that doesn't meet my requirements, that's project failure. If you give me something that doesn't meet up with my requirement, that is project failure. So this is why the concept of requirement is very important, right? This is where we capture the functionality or specific conditions that a deliverable must meet, right? And so on. So the next thing is we collect requirements, right? And collecting requirements is where we develop project requirements by examination or analysis of project stakeholder needs. The focus should be on defining the sponsors, customers, and relevant stakeholders' measurable needs, and the requirement goes in to feed the work breakdown structure. You can see we're going towards the work breakdown structure and also quality and schedule. So let's talk about collecting requirements. Now, what do we mean by collecting requirements? This is where you start asking stakeholders questions and you start analyzing the information they're giving you to properly document the requirements. Collecting requirements will more or less lead you to stating the specifications, the acceptance criteria for the project, right? That's what it will lead you. Now, there are so many ways of collecting requirements. As you can see, there's a process for collecting requirements, and collecting requirements is not a one-off process. You know, you can discover a requirement that leads to another requirement that leads to another requirement. And this is why business analysts are usually part of the core team of in software development, right? So let's look at the inputs. I'll just look at some inputs. We start with the project charter. The project charter is where we have high-level requirements. So from your project charter, some high-level requirements are already stated. And of course, we've created the scope management plan and the requirements management plan, which will guide us in how to document, analyze, prioritize, and trace requirements. They're all stated there, right? We also have the stakeholder engagement plan, which helps us to engage stakeholders as we collect requirements from them. We also look at the stakeholder register, the people we are collecting requirements from, and we can also get high-level requirements from the business case and from contract documents. So if someone gives you a contract, you can analyze the requirements from the contract and so on. So these are some of the inputs. Let me talk about assumptions log. The assumptions made can also lead to requirements. Let me leave it there. And if you have past project templates, maybe you've collected requirements in a previous project, you can use that list of requirements for your current project. So you go into organization process assets. Don't forget, organization process assets is not just policies, processes, and procedures. They also contain what? Knowledge bases. So if I have a project where a similar project, they've collected requirements, the requirements documentation is there. What am I going to do? I'm just going to go and ask, please give me the requirements documentation and I'll use it. This is why its organization process asset also serves as a knowledge repository that you can access past projects and templates. So tools and techniques. Tools and techniques are the tools and techniques you can use to collect requirements. So different ways of collecting requirements. And first of all, expert judgment. Now, in the PMBOK, expert judgment refers to business analysis. So you shouldn't be surprised that we have business analysis, which means on a project, a business analyst is an expert when it comes to gathering requirements. That's why they usually have tools, diagrams, and so on. That's their job. Another way to gather requirements is data gathering, brainstorming. So you are working on a new project and you're there with your team. The client is requesting for a particular solution. Your team can brainstorm. Oh, you're going to need this for this project. Oh, this is going to be needed. So they're generating ideas about requirements. We can interview subject matter experts, project participants, right, to obtain requirements. We can have a focus group discussion, right? Focus group discussion can include pre-qualified stakeholders, subject matter experts, project participants, and you're discussing, and from that discussion, you're getting requirements. Now, difference between interviews and focus group is that interviews are usually one-on-one. Focus groups can be up to 14. So imagine you have a group of experts that are actually discussing about the requirements. That's usually a focus group. And you are what do you call it, moderating the session. But interview, you're going to meet them one after the other, talking, oh, what do you think about this project? Oh, okay, you interview them. One of the best practices when it comes to interview is to maintain confidentiality, which means you should reassure the person that if they don't want any of the information disclosed, that you are going to maintain confidentiality with them. Another way to collect requirements is questionnaires and surveys. Now, imagine you're working on a project for an organization, and that project is going to impact all the employees. And let's say there are 7,000 employees in the organization. You can't interview all of them. When are you going to finish? Or you can't have focus group of 14 people. When are you going to finish? The best way is to distribute questionnaires. You are going to carefully construct a questionnaire that will help you gather the requirements you need to understand what they want. Benchmarking. Now, benchmarking is very easy to understand. Let's say what you want to build has already been built. So you can benchmark on already existing standards to determine the requirements of your project. Document analysis. Now, document analysis is where we analyze documents like the business case, the agreements, and any other project document so that we can identify the requirements of the project. So just as the name says, document analysis, that's what you're doing, analyzing documents. Now, voting is more on the prioritization side. So let's say we've gathered requirements and, okay, let me give an example. So we're working on a project, and we're working on a project, and we have two solutions, whether we're going to use Oracle database or MySQL, or you're using Microsoft database for a project. And, we can't seem to agree on the requirement, then voting. So voting is a form of prioritization, right? Voting is a form of prioritization, right? So that's it. Then multi-criteria decision analysis is where we look at other factors that can influence our decision on the requirement. So let's say that in a particular hotel, you're thinking of putting jacuzzis in every room in the hotel. Now, that's a good thing, right? But let's look at multi-criteria decision analysis. Let's look at other factors. Now, if you put jacuzzi in other hotels, then what's the cost of running the building? What's the cost of this and that? So, multi-criteria decision analysis helps us to prioritize as well. So we look at other factors that influences the requirements. Now, data representation shows how we can display the requirements. We can use affinity diagrams to show, right, if the requirements are related in any way. The word affinity means like. So if we have similar requirements, we are hearing the 2-3 stakeholders talking, and they are talking about almost the same thing. Just group the requirements together in a box, and we call that affinity diagram. Then we have what we call mind mapping. And when we talk about mind mapping, we are talking about using a diagram to show the interrelationship between requirements, right? Mind mapping is also a collaborative tool where we start with a diagram and we start showing how one requirement is connected to the other. Okay, for the sake of this class, let me show you how mind mapping works. So let's say we want to plan for the end of year party. Yes, end of year party. Let me call it EOYP. Now, what do you think we're going to need on a high level? Who wants to plan our end of year party? Though this is February, people usually get creative when it comes to party. Yeah, Peter.
Probably a DJ, a hall for the parties.
You've got it. So do you know, with what you said, I'm going to create entertainment as a core requirement, and then I can now lead it to DJ as another requirement stemming from that requirement. So can you see DJ, right? So if we have other ideas as regarding entertainment, maybe games, so we'll do that. Now we can now create something as another link as regarding refreshment of food, right? I can create another one called food. Then, just like Peter said, someone will now say, oh, we should have starters, right? So now there's a tool called Miro.com. If you use Miro.com, all of us will be able to draw extensions. So as someone has created entertainment, another person is putting DJ, and it's such a beautiful experience because everybody can contribute at the same time. So that is mind mapping. I just needed to show you this. So the tools and techniques can be a lot, but let's continue. Let me just continue. Now, nominal group technique is where you vote on the best ideas after a brainstorming session. So we now have a list of ideas. Let's choose the best ideas. Observation and conversation is where we're discussing with stakeholders, observing how, let's say that some people are complaining that their computer is logs off very frequently, right? The moment they stand up their desk, the computer logs off and they have to log in. Now, sometimes you just need to go there and see them and see how the problem they're having and talk to them to gather the requirement. That's observation and conversation. Now, facilitation is also used to gather requirements. Here, there are some specific tools like joint application development, JAD, and joint application development is where users and developers, software developers, work together to create a product. Joint application development is normally used when people are building games. All these internet, all these video games. The players, those kids that play, meet with developers. They get information straight from them to design the game. In manufacturing, there's something similar called quality function deployment. And then we also have the user stories, which developers create with the customer to determine the functionality. Context diagram helps us to see how information will flow through a system, how information will flow through an application to another. This can help us to look at areas where we may have data breaches and so on. And then lastly, prototypes. And prototypes helps us to gather requirements. When you say prototype, you can easily, say, oh, just imagine you want to build a house and you have a prototype of the house. By looking at the prototype, you can give the builder, your requirements. No, I don't like the garage here. Can you move the garage? We can use a prototype to gather requirements. So at the end of the day, we have what we call requirements documentation. That means using different tools and techniques. We've documented a number of requirements, and we've also been able to trace the requirements using the requirements traceability matrix. Now, let me say something before we go for a break. Then I'll show you another way we can look at these tools and techniques. So don't worry at all, right? Don't feel overwhelmed. I'll tell you why there are so many tools and techniques. Now, imagine you have some car problems. Permit me to use Lagos, right? Because if I use your city, I might just mess things up. So let me use Lagos. Now, just imagine that you're somewhere in Aja or your VI, your mechanic is in Surulere, and then you have car problems. And you wait 3 hours. Now, the reason why you don't want to call other mechanics is because you know how it is. Your mechanic knows your car, has history with your car, and so on. Your mechanic, after waiting 3 hours, now gets to your place with screwdriver and discovers what he needs to check. It needs other tools. How will you feel? You'll be furious. So what PMI did is this. The process is collect requirements, but they gave us a toolkit, right? A toolbox, right? And this toolbox should help you gather any type of requirement. That's what they did. So on a real life project, it's possible they're just using 2 or 3. For example, most people you'll interview the client. What do you want? You can now have some experts form a focus group with the client discussing, or you can use questionnaire. Do you see these things we do even without a process? But they're just showing us different tools and techniques so that for some projects, some tools are appropriate, just like for some cars or for some problems, we use certain tools. But PMI is just giving us the full list in their own toolkit. Remember what we said at the beginning of this class? that this is not a prescription but a guide. It's a guide because when you are collecting requirements on a project, you don't have to use all the tools and techniques. Look at it this way. You go to a 5-star restaurant and you want to have dinner. And on your left, you have 3 types of forks. On your right, you have 3 types of knives. In front of you, you have 3 types of spoons. And they put the dish in front of you. Now, if you like, use knife to eat the dish. It's your business. They've given you the tools. The one you think is the best tool for that dish is the one you should use. That's how you should look at this input tools and techniques and outputs. And that's it, really. So it's not, you don't really have to memorize everything. If you can, big plus. If you can't, understand what we're trying to do. Understand what the process is all about. That's it. So don't feel overwhelmed that, what have I, this project manager, I thought it was just straightforward. So that's it. Yes. Do we have any contributions or questions before we go on our break? Please, you guys are not talking to me today. I'm feeling alone after Valentine's Day.
No, really. Sorry for me, the way I even stepped out just now. It's not, you know, alone, but just, I can say I'm not so much, that's something different. So I'm trying, I have some things that I'm really a bit into, not because I don't want to be in class, just because it's an emergency thing.
Oh, no.
So you will see the way I left yesterday. So it's that's just so.
Okay.
Just trying to like follow.
No problem, sir. Yes.
It's fine, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Cynthia and Rhoda. Let's hear from you. At least you didn't go anywhere. So what's going on?
It's a lot. I'm trying to process, please.
Oh, it's a lot. Yes, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yes, that's true. That's true. It's a lot of information. I won't lie to you. But just let it sink. Collecting requirements is what you do when you're talking with your clients. And some of these things you do subconsciously. You don't even know it's a process in the PMBOK. Like, brainstorming. What are we going to need? That's all PMI did is they packaged it. That's what they did. These are things we do in real life without even calling it a process. PMI has just packaged it into a process. So let me allow us to cool down because it seems as if it's getting hot in here. So we'll have a 10-minute break and come back. All right, thank you. See you in 10 minutes time. Yeah. So collect requirement is, so this is what we do, right, in order to capture the requirements in a project. But like I said, I will show you another form of this process based on the tools and techniques that is easier to follow. And I did some research before I could get this done, right? And this is it. So if you look at the tools and techniques, right, that we have here, I did some analysis and I was able to group them in the form of the business analysis process. And look at it. Remember, definition of business analysis is a collection, analysis, documentation, and prioritization of requirements. Now, the same tools and techniques that we went through in a lumped up form can be better organized here. Now, this means that collect requirement process is actually fulfilling the entire business analysis process, which means that there are tools that help us to gather information. There are tools that helps us to analyze. There are tools that helps us to document. And there are tools that help us to prioritize. So that means that in collecting requirements, we're actually fulfilling the business analysis part. We are actually analyzing requirements. We're doing everything in that same process so that we can eventually start prioritizing. And the reason why you want to prioritize is that there are some things that you want to do quickly on a project. There are some things that you may want to do later if you have funds. And another way of prioritization that is popular is called the MOSCO. Must have, should have, could have, but it's not a tool and technique in the PMBOK guide. So collect requirements, gather all the information, analyze it, document it, and you have your requirements documentation, right? We have gathered the information and we're documenting requirements. Now, what's a requirements traceability matrix? A requirements traceability matrix, I'll share 2 documents with us today. That's the scope management plan and the requirement management plan, right? The scope management plan talks about how to manage more or less the scope of the project, and the requirements management plan helps us to manage the requirements. The requirements are the details of your project. Without the requirements, your project can fail. So that's why we have a separate plan just to be able to capture requirements properly. So let's look at this. So when it comes to requirements documentation, let's look at this. We have requirements traceability. You document your requirements here. So this is where you have all your requirements, right? Then which business need are they fulfilling? You say the business need here, the project objective, the part of the WBS, the deliverable that the requirement will be found, what element of product design is. So that means like, so let me give an example of product design. So requirement, let's say on a website, I want to search for movies, right? Now, when it comes to design, I'm going to design a search bar. And so the product design, how I'm going to design this search for movies will be a search bar. Product development, now link it to where, to the product feature, that's the search bar, and then to the point where we test it. So the requirements traceability matrix ensures that each requirement meets up with the business need. Remember what I said? Is actually developed into the product and finally tested. So that means that if they build, let's say it's a website, someone is going to test that the search bar works perfectly. If I search for movies, right, does it give me results? If I search using movie titles, does it give me results? So the person developing the test cases will come up with different scenarios to test the search bar to ensure that it's actually doing its work and not giving us errors. So why do we use requirements traceability matrix? Now, remember the Embraer project, they had 18,000 requirements. They must have used this kind of tool. Why? Because it tracks all the requirements. So requirements traceability matrix ensures that you don't lose sight of your requirements. That's number 1. Number 2, it ensures that every requirement is tested, right? Just like we said, we want search bar to search for movies. Someone, when they develop the software or the website, someone is going to test that you can actually search. That's what a traceability matrix does. So if you're using a traceability matrix, it ensures that all the requirements are captured and developed and tested in the project. Okay? Do you have any questions, please? Do you have any questions? Are we good to go? Okay. Any questions? Now, let me say something if we don't have any questions. PMI does not mandate that we use all the input tools, techniques, and outputs for every project. Now, requirements feasibility matrix may not be found in a construction project. So you may not even come across it. It's used in the software industry, right? So if you're in a software project. So if some of these tools and techniques seem foreign, it's probably because they don't use it in your industry. And it's okay, right? Don't feel bad that I don't know what the requirements feasibility. That's what we're here to learn. And it's possible that even after you pass your PMP, you might never use a requirements feasibility matrix in your life. But the good thing is you understand how it works. And if you get to an organization where they use it, at least you remember I explained the major concept behind it, right? And of course, you can now do further research. So PMI does not mandate you use all the inputs, all the tools and techniques, and all the outputs, which means I might have a project where I'm not using requirements traceability matrix, and I just have the requirements document. It's okay. Remember, it's not a prescription, it's a guide. You are in control. So if you feel you don't need requirements traceability matrix, or your industry, they don't really use this, that's fine, right? They are not forcing us. It's a guide, not a prescription, okay? So just enjoy the ride and just let it sink in and you'll be fine. So let's go to the next process, define scope. So what's the job of define scope? Now, the define scope process is majorly to determine what is in scope and what is out of scope. That's a major job. And it comes after we've collected requirements. Now, this is one of the reasons why we prioritize requirements, because we're going to say this is part of the scope of project. This is not part of the scope of project. So that's one of the things it does. Well, let's go through it and we can see other things this process does. So the goal of define scope is a scope statement. So we're going to create what we call a written scope statement. And once that scope statement is created, we don't need to reference the project data for scope information. The scope statement should be detailed enough to describe what the scope of the project is all about. Now, this is accomplished by creating a clear description of the project and product. What do we call a clear description of the project? That's the project scope. And what do we call a clear description of the product? It's a product scope, which means the scope statement should have both the project scope and product scope in it. Description of the work, description of the product. It also will determine which requirements are included and excluded from the project scope. So this is where I say the major job of your scope statement is to tell you what is in scope and what is out of scope. And in order to avoid misunderstanding, the scope statement could include what is not in the project, and that is what we call project exclusions. Now, one way of knowing what something is by knowing what is not. If I say to you, this child is a boy, not a girl. You can't come and tell me that child is a girl. You can't even make that mistake because I've told you what it's not, right? So when you are doing scope definition, we are focused on what is and what is not to make it clear. That's one of the jobs of your scope statement. So you can see the output of this process is to create a written scope statement. We're going to look at one in a minute, and it comes from, look at requirements documentation, right? The requirements we've collected, we've documented. We'll also look at risk in a project, risk register, And then we also are governed by the scope management plan, right? Because scope management plan helps us to create the scope statement, right? So an expert, someone who has knowledge of the application area or industry, can help us to create a project scope statement. We also have alternative analysis. Alternative analysis comes up again to look at alternative ways to achieve the scope of work. Let me give an example. So let's say that the project is related to providing power. How many ways can we provide power? You can use a diesel generator. You can use a gas turbine. You can use solar power. You can use wind energy. So we look at all those alternatives to decide on how the scope of work will be done. So alternative analysis look at alternative ways of achieving the scope of work. And this helps us to select the best alternative in terms of scope definition. Now, we also have multi-criteria decision analysis, other factors we need to consider in coming up with the scope statement. We have facilitation. We can actually have a workshop where we invite stakeholders and ensure that they have a common understanding, and we also allow stakeholders to contribute to what they expect regarding the scope so that we can create the scope statement. And then product analysis. Remember, one of the things your scope statement does is to describe the product. How do we describe the product? Through product analysis. So under product analysis, you can have product engineering, you can have reverse engineering, and these are other techniques that can be used to describe the features and functionality of the product you're creating. So at the end of the day, we are creating the project scope statement, looking at the alternatives, looking at different factors, looking at the risk, describing the product helps us to create the project scope statement. Now, your project scope statement contains 6 things. Number 1, deliverables. 2, product scope description. 3, project exclusions. 4, assumptions. 5, constraints. And 6, acceptance criteria. So when you create a scope statement, you can expect it to have the 6 things, right? Now, so it tells you what is in scope, and project exclusions tells you what is out of scope, and also includes the acceptance criteria. Okay, so let me show us an example of a scope statement so that we can see what it looks like in real life, okay? So now, if you look at this document, this is scope management plan. And one of the reasons why I need you to read it is to know how it's drafted. You notice that the scope management plan will talk about the scope statement, the WPS, how scope should be verified, and how scope can be. So that's what a scope management plan does. And sometimes it contains some of the documents you're going to create. So let's look at the scope statement as created here, right? So what does a scope statement look like? Now you can see the 6 aspects. The product scope description, which describes what the project will accomplish, right? I have a little issue with this definition. The product scope description should actually be the description of the product, but just leave it product acceptance criteria, deliverables, exclusions, constraints, assumptions. Now, the way this template works is that in one section, it explains what you should have under project scope statement. Then underneath where you have black is an example of a scope statement. So let's read this. Let me maximize it so that it's clear. So the project scope statement provides a detailed description of the project deliverables, constraints, exclusions, assumptions, and acceptance criteria. Additionally, the scope statement includes what work should not be performed in order to alleviate any implied but unnecessary work which falls outside of project scope, right? So now, so you can see why we're creating it. We want to ensure that it shows the work that should not be performed, right? It's clear on that. So this project includes the design, programming, and testing of a new software application for tracking the company's finances. The deliverables for this project are a completed software application for finance tracking with flexibility to modify and expand the application as necessary in the future. This project will be accepted once the new software has been successfully tested in each department and has been shown to be compatible with the company's current information technology infrastructure. This project does not include ongoing operations and maintenance of software. Only internal personnel and resources may be used for this project. Additionally, the project is not to exceed 180 days in duration or 450,000 in spending. Assumptions for this project are that support will be provided by the project sponsor and all department managers, and that adequate internal resources are available for the successful completion of the project. Yes, that's kind of a long read. So let me show you the 6 parts again, and let's see if we can trace them. One is product scope description. 2 is deliverables. 3 is exclusion. 4 is assumptions. 5 is constraints. And 6 is acceptance criteria. So let's see if all these are found in this scope statement, right? Let's see. So I'm going to read sentence by sentence, and I'll wait for you guys to let me know what you think the sentence is talking about. So it says, this project includes the design, programming, and testing of a new software application for tracking the company's finances. So what do you think that is talking about on the right? Yes. Yes, I need your feedback now. Yes, Cynthia, Peter, Rhoda.
Number 1, product scope description.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Even though I think this is more of a project scope description. Remember what we said about project scope? It's the work. And designing, program, and testing is the work. But based on their own definition, it's the product scope description. Thank you. So let's read the second sentence. And you guys will tell me what the second sentence gives. The deliverables for this project are a completed software application for finance tracking with the flexibility to modify and expand the application as necessary in the future. So what's this one talking about? Yes. What is this one talking about?
Deliverables.
Deliverables. So 2 is correct. So let's look at the third statement, right? The third statement. This project will be accepted once the new software has been successfully tested in each department and has been shown to be compatible with the company's current information technology infrastructure. What's that statement talking about? Yes, please, I need your help now. I need your help. What's that statement talking about? Yes? Okay.
Acceptance, project acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance criteria. So if we're going to accept it, it must be compatible with our IT infrastructure, and we must be able to expand it. That's acceptance. Let's look at the next statement. This project does not include ongoing operations and maintenance of the software. What does this talk about? This project does not include ongoing operations and maintenance of software.
Exclusions.
Exclusions. Now, do you see why exclusions are important? Imagine they build the software and they are still expecting them to maintain the software. No, that's another contract. So you have to be able to draw the line and say, this is where the project ends. If you do anything outside this is another contract, another project. You need to be clear on your exclusions. Only internal personnel and resources may be used for this project. What's that? Only internal personnel and resources may be used for this project. What's that? Yes. Who's going to
Constraints.
help? What?
Project constraints.
Constraints. So we're talking about constraints. We're talking about constraints. Right? Additionally, the project is not to exceed 180 days in duration or 450,000 in spending. What's that? What's that?
That's constraints, you know.
Exactly, it's also a constraint. All right. Then, assumptions for this project are that support will be provided by the project sponsor and all department managers, and that adequate internal resources are available for the successful completion of this project. What's that? It's giving itself away, right? All right, that is assumption. So you can see that everything here is an example. Now, if you like to, try this, you can copy this, put it into ChatGPT or any AI tool you use, and just say, please create a scope statement using this template, and see what, and then of course you supply it details of the kind of project you're working on as much as you can, and you probably like what you see, right? So that's it. That's it. That's a scope statement, right? It doesn't have to be too bulky. It just has to help us know exactly what is in your project and what is not part of your project. That is it. Okay, so we've seen what a scope statement looks like, right? And I've given you a tip on how to create one. Now we're going to talk about creating your work breakdown structure. So you can see why I said waterfall processes will eventually lead you to the work breakdown structure. It's because each process actually supplies output to the next. So now that we've created the scope statement, we've determined the deliverables of the project, we're going to create what we call a work breakdown structure. Now, the goal of a work breakdown structure is to break the deliverables. Now, where did we talk about deliverables? In the scope statement. Break the deliverables into smaller components so that they can be easily estimated and managed and controlled. Now, there's something about project management that we need to know. In order to manage very large projects, we break it down, right? And that's what the work breakdown structure is. It helps you to break large projects, even large complex projects, into smaller work packages. Now, and what we call work packages is that the work is small enough to be estimated. So if someone says, can you handle a $10 billion project? In your mind, you'll be like, where am I going to start from? But if you know the deliverables of that project and you can break it down to levels where you can start estimating the work, you'll probably be able to handle the project. So the concept of the work breakdown structure is to break the project into smaller, more manageable, and when we say manageable, more estimatable areas. So let me show you what a simple work breakdown structure will look like. Now, the work breakdown structure shows you the work that is involved in the project. And of course, I'm sure you don't have to ask many questions. We all know what this project is. This is engineering, procurement, and construction. So if you're in the oil and gas industry, then you probably know what this is. So work breakdown structure is a graphical representation of the work of the project broken down into smaller areas that make it easier to estimate and manage. It is a standard when you are managing projects in waterfall to create a WBS work breakdown structure. And how do you do it? You break down the deliverables into smaller pieces. So that's the work breakdown structure. So you can Google maybe work breakdown structure in your industry. Oh, I need a work breakdown structure of a residential building or a power plant. Now, if you are in that industry, you probably understand the work breakdown structure. So that's what we're saying. It's about creating a work breakdown structure that helps us to see and to break the project into more manageable areas. So that's really what we're talking about. Also, one more thing is that the lowest level of a work breakdown structure is called a work package, right? So you break down into a work package level, any subsequent decomposition leads us to creating activities. So let's look at the input tools and techniques in creating the WBS. So in creating the WBS, of course, the scope statement is an input because that's where we identify the deliverables of the project and what we're breaking down are deliverables. And then requirements documentation also serves as a reference. This is where we have stored all the requirements in the project. And don't forget, the requirements traceability matrix, we actually trace requirements to their WBS areas. Expert judgment. Now, an expert can help you to break down a project. I remember the first construction project I managed. I didn't know a clue about construction. So we needed to create a WBS. It was one of the experts assigned, one of the architects assigned to the project actually helped me. What's that? Expert judgment. So if you're working on a project where you really don't know the areas of work, an expert can guide you, an expert can tell you. Then another thing we have, what does the composition mean? Breaking down the work from high level to low level. Now, the composition is, let me show you what the composition is, right? So the composition is, we have a wedding. So what are the plan for this wedding? Invitation, food, bridal. If it's a Nigerian wedding, I can decompose it. I'll decompose it to cultural wedding, white wedding, reception, reception. You can even do cut with it. You can break it down. So the composition is a mental exercise of breaking a project into smaller bits. That's what the composition is. And the word decomposition is actually used in the digestive system, how we break food down into smaller bits that the body can process. So just as you have a project and you're breaking down the project into smaller pieces so that we can estimate, that's the same thing. So we're using the same word. Then, if after breaking the deliverables down, we can now create what we call the scope baseline. So what's the scope baseline? Scope baseline contains 3 documents. It contains the scope statement, it contains the WBS, it contains the WBS dictionary, right? So these are the 3 things in scope baseline. Now, look at the word baseline. Anytime you create a baseline in project management, it means that you have completed planning in that area, in that knowledge area. So that means that when you complete scope planning, there are 3 documents you must submit as your baseline: the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, which we're talking about, and the WBS dictionary. These 3 documents form your scope baseline. Okay? So, and once you create your scope baseline, you are going to go on further by planning in other areas like schedule, cost, and so on. So let's look at the WBS. And there are 3 ways of creating a WBS. The first one I've mentioned, use the deliverables of the project. That's one way. So these are deliverables: food, invitations, rider, and we can sign off on them. Another way is by using phases. So you can use the phases of project to create WBS. Now, if you look at this and you study it very carefully, you find out that this is one phase, this is another phase, and this is another phase. How do I know that? Look at EPC means engineering. You can see basic design and engineering, detailed design. So this is one phase, then procurement, P, then construction. So you can see the 3 phases. Now, if you're using the phases, what happens is that underneath, when you start breaking down, you can now switch to deliverables. So that means that you can start with phases, then underneath each phase, list the deliverables, then keep breaking it up. Or you can just start with deliverables. It's your choice, right? And of course, they're usually templates, so you can pick from there, right? Then the third way is, let's say you're contracting work out, and so a vendor is going to be managing monitoring and evaluation, M&E. Let's say you're outsourcing that to a company, right? M&E, you can also create a line for them. I'm just showing you the different ways of creating WBS elements. You can create a line, and so the contractor's work will be decomposed under M&E. So that is it. All right, I'm going to stop here so that we can enjoy the rest of our Sunday, right? Then when we come back next week, we're going to talk about the elements of the WBS. We're going to talk about WBS dictionary, and then we're going to answer questions of book management. All right. Please feedback, right? So I want everybody to give feedback at this point in time because this is probably the most quiet class we've had since we started. So Cynthia, feedback again. Yes.
It's a lot, so I'll need a lot. It is a lot to process in one at once.
Okay. All right.
Ah.
But let me say something.
Hmm.
By the time we start answering questions, you won't need to read. It's a lot of information, no doubt, but it's going into your subconscious. When you see the questions, you just be wondering, this, I can answer this, I can answer that. So don't worry. We are making progress.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry. Let me see you next weekend.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Peter, let's get your feedback, brother.
That is almost the same thing. There's a whole lot of information to process. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Project managers need to know a lot, right? Because, of course, something as small as WBS, we're not able to do it. It means we don't really know project management. Yeah, sure, it's a lot. It's quite a lot of information. The book is about 900 pages or between 500 and 900. So it's a lot of information. So it's okay. Rhoda, let's hear from you. Rhoda, let's hear from you. And we call it a day. Rhoda, let's hear from you.
Okay. In my own case, it's not actually my first time of hearing those, so it's kind of like a refresher class.
So you're used to it. Yeah, Rhoda. Rhoda's used to it. So she's a veteran. All right. We will call it a day. Thank you for joining.